think we can get started now. People can join as we start to introduce ourselves. So thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to Robin AI's Future of Legal webinar series. My name is James Clough. I'm Robin's co-founder and Chief Technology Officer, and I'm joined today very kindly by Ivan Beckley, who's the founder and CEO of Suvera, and Danielle Lawrence, founder and CEO of Freyda. And today we're going to be talking about something we at Robin call AI Plus, which is the combination of people with expertise in a particular domain and technology, AI and software, where we combine the best of both, the best of that technology and the best of that human judgment and expertise to try to create a solution that's better than either could do on their own. We're going to be taking questions at the end of the session, so if at any point during the session you've got a question for us, you can just drop it into the Q&A function in the Zoom webinar, and we'll answer it at the end if we've got time. So let's get started with some quick introductions. Why don't we start with yourself, Danielle?
Sure, thanks James, and thanks for having me on this webinar today. As James mentioned, co-founder and CEO of Freyda, and we're essentially a SaaS platform that helps financial institutions to automate data capture from complex financial reports. We use a suite of AI technologies in order to do that in a very automated and intuitive way for our users. And very excited to be talking with the panel about the topics today.
Thanks so much, Danielle. And Ivan?
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. My name is Ivan Beckley, CEO and co-founder at Suvera. Really a pleasure to be here and discuss kind of this human AI plus kind of conversation. So at Suvera, we're a virtual care company. So we're contracted by the healthcare system to better manage patients with chronic conditions from home. And we build our own technology to superpower clinicians so they can see more patients in a shorter space of time, and to empower patients to look after themselves wherever they are. So really happy to be here and look forward to discussing more.
Great, thanks Ivan. And thanks for joining us. And for those who don't know, we at Robin, we're a legal tech company. Robin AI, we've got the mission to make contracts simple. We do that with a combination of human expertise from our in-house legal team, but also software that we're building and launching this week, hence the webinar series that helps people draft, review, and then store and query their contracts more easily than ever before. So to get us started on this AI plus topic, let me ask this: how has AI plus worked in your businesses, in the domains that you're tackling? What is it that you do to combine technology and people, and why is it that you've chosen that approach? Should we start with yourself, Ivan?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so when we started the business, it was very much with the intention of looking at the opportunity to combine technology with the current practice in healthcare. I'm a medic by background. I studied medicine, qualified as a doctor, but through that whole experience, I also spent a lot of time trying to understand technology. I did a master's in data science. I worked at Google, and kind of those two worlds don't really collide in reality. And so I was kind of able to see opportunities to bring those two disciplines together. And so the company initially started off with this hope that technology by itself would be hugely compelling to the industry if it was simple, if it was integrated, and if it was safe. But what we realized is in developing that technology, which at the time was simply to automate reviews for patients. So reviews are every time someone has a medication, they have a condition that they need to manage, clinicians or doctors have to regularly review how are things going. The challenge is that often that happens in appointments, and there isn't that many appointments in the system available to do that for everyone. And so we wanted to automate that process so that you could have a review, but without having to need an appointment. The challenge was when we started to look at that, there was more to be done than, just collecting the information and passing it on to someone. And so the challenge was we created more work because we were automating so much that previously had to go through someone. And so normally you could manage that flow of work because you knew what appointments were coming, and so you could deal with them. But we were sending dozens of reviews a week, and they weren't processing it as quick. And so we put more pressure on the system when the job was to reduce the pressure. And so we realized actually there was an opportunity for us to have our own care team that would take the reviews from our technology and complete the task. So take the review and then decide to increase someone's medication, or decide to refer them to another doctor, or see them again in an appointment. And so we built the virtual clinic with those two things in mind, bringing technology and a care team to help people better manage their condition without putting additional pressure in the system. And so we've learned a lot from that approach. And I think so far, really, we've adopted that kind of care team and technology approach in order to really help the system reduce the demand that they have, but also give patients better access, because this technology helps our care team basically see more people, and also to make quicker decisions, because there's more data that we surface for them. And so those two things are big drivers in how we use technology to kind of advance the agenda for our care team.
No, that's fascinating. So is it right you sort of started out with the experts not being sort of internal to Suvera, and then made that shift because it was the sort of friction between technology and people who weren't too familiar with it? Is that right?
Yeah, it was essentially that we were bringing in a technology platform that they weren't used to managing what comes out of that platform. And so we said, actually, what they're used to is collaborating with colleagues to get work done. So we'll be an analogous colleague, and then we'll use technology internally to drive our efficiency so we can be the most efficient colleague in that team. And so we look at ourselves as a member of the care team for all our partners, rather than a platform you pay for and you use how you want.
Perfect. Makes a lot of sense. And how does that process work at Freyda, Danielle, the process of combining people and the technology you're building?
Yeah, I think we had a similar start to Ivan, actually. So my background is in financial services, specifically asset management. And we came to found Freyda a few years ago, sort of born out of some of the frustrations we'd seen firsthand in that industry, which was around the massive amounts of data that is passed along still mostly in documents and financial reports. But at the same time, sort of data was increasing exponentially, appetite for more information and more transparency was growing, but there was a huge bottleneck because essentially it relied on quite manual processes, analysts sort of, filtering through all these documents, finding the relevant information, and then copy and pasting or keying and rekeying into spreadsheets or databases or financial accounting systems. And so what we did, one of the first things we did is actually go out and talk to as many customers or people in the industry about their pain points. And 87% of the people that we interviewed cited this issue of data collection and manual data entry as a top 3 pain point. So with that, we sort of, the next question is why we haven't solved that problem. And at the time, the technology that people had seen or had existed in the industry, things like OCR or templates, rules-based approaches, weren't delivering the efficiencies that were required for these organizations to reap the benefits. So we very much started off with that target in mind, sort of trying to get as much automation as possible using cutting edge technology. So we actually started collaborating with 4 PhDs from academia to bring that cutting edge approach to a specific business problem. And I think we did anticipate that there would be some level of augmentation required, just because in asset management, the data is so variable. There's a lack of standardization, and we really wanted to eliminate any post-processing, i.e. Freyda should exist as a tool that completely automates every step of that data collection, transformation, standardization. We didn't want analysts to essentially redo that work after we'd extracted it. And so we did take the approach that we would need a human in the loop from the beginning. I think one of the insights we learned since then was actually the end-to-end user experience was just as important, if not more important, than how well the technology performed by itself. In other words, it's much better for our customers if the technology is capturing, 90% of information, but it's really, really easy for them to come in as a business user and a specialist and close that 10% gap, versus if we were 99%, but it was almost impossible for them to get that last percent. And so we really had to think about the end-to-end experience and how we make that intuitive. And so we built that into the interface as well. So business users can use it as a supercharged analyst, essentially.
Yeah, that's interesting. It sounds like quite a similar journey to the one we went on at Robin. So for us, of course, the experts are lawyers and paralegals, but I suppose similar in as much as they're fairly well paid professionals, sometimes working in that regulated environment as well. And we also started out thinking, can we fully automate certain tasks? For us, it was reviewing simple contracts, get it right 95% of the time, and then hand that over to somebody else as a sort of finished piece of work that was usually good enough, but not necessarily always. And like you said, found that it was actually a question of combining some statistical AI-driven approach that could get something almost right, but not necessarily 100% right, with a good user interface that let that expert interact with the result of what the technology had done in a really easy, intuitive way, and it was making that interaction between the person and the technology a bit more dynamic and a bit more back and forth than something that was just, here's the answer, go away and check it. And so we moved from a sort of our initial approach of trying to fully automate something to a more kind of dynamic platform where users were still sort of doing the work, as it were, but with suggestions and assistance and guidance the whole time, driven by technology. So it wasn't just all technology followed by all people. They were kind of interleaved into that task throughout the entire thing. That was something that we found just resonated so much better with customers, whether they're customers in the sense people using the software or people who are kind of consuming the output of that process. As a sort of follow-up to that, Danielle, have you found there are particular, well, let me ask this way, what is it that makes that AI plus process work in your business, in the domain you're working with? Are there particular tasks or particular subtasks that you find it really works with and things that it's not appropriate for? And how do you decide where to apply this approach to problems that your users have?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think hyperautomation or AI has been taking off, and I think a lot of people have realised that, as we're talking about, it's not really about replacing humans. It is about how you can reinvigorate operational efficiency by augmenting human employees. So although straight-through processing can work in some instances, there's increasingly complex, business tasks that do require oversight. So even the best AI models, for example, need to be checked continuously because they drift, as they encounter new data, different situations. And so always keeping a human oversight, we always say to customers, is a smart move. And a good example of where human in the loop can be really effective is exception handling, right? So for critical documents like cash flow, documents where actually you need to action them and they need to be, you know, they're high risk, they really need to be accurate. You know, some documents might actually be missing information, payment information, or we may recognize that, you know, the bank details don't quite match up to what we were expecting them to be. And so we would always want some level of guidance and review to exist in those type of high risk processes. On the other hand, you know, things that are, you know, very repetitive, high volume, that can be, you know, that do have a level of patterns, for lack of a more technical word, associated with the data. Those typically are a little bit more relevant for AI. But again, another sort of maybe example of where we would not recommend maybe an AI approach is actually when they are really repetitive, but also quite simple. We always say to our clients, actually, if you're automating something, you're looking at documents that don't vary a lot, maybe a templated approach or a, you know, simple OCR approach is actually the best way, and you can get better outcomes in that way. So it is a sliding scale depending on the business problem. Yeah, but we've decided, you know, for our particular business problem, that augmented approach is typically the best way forward for the problem we're trying to address. And
Ivan, you mentioned sort of making that transition, having learned this from a sort of full software solution to something that had people in Suvera kind of working as people in the loop there. Do you think you're going to eventually transition the other way again and go into a fully AI or fully software driven approach to solving some of these problems? Or is it always going to be right to keep people in the loop in your case?
I think for the problem we're trying to solve, it makes sense to have human in the loop. I think if we decide to solve another problem, then we'll have to definitely reevaluate. I think the reason why this problem is, you know, the right solution for this problem is human in the loop is because there are a lot of complexities that technology by themselves can't handle. So healthcare is a human business, always has been. It's fundamentally at its core, one human being looking after another who has more knowledge than the person who needs that help. And so what we recognize is that having the human involved in areas of care where technology is not going to be as useful is always going to be helpful, especially when a lot of that care is for people who have conditions that are not going away. There is no treatment that makes this condition, you know, disappear. People have to live with these things. And so having a regular and consistent individual that's there to support you, who is empowered and enabled by technology to do that more efficiently, to do that before they even recognize they need that support, because the data suggests that actually they're going in the opposite direction, I think will always be useful. What we are always mindful of is recognizing that there are areas where actually that we can automate that doesn't take away from the human experience, that we should lean into in a very human way. So I think it's just about balancing where the value of that human being involved in care is going to be materially important and where actually it's not. And I think a lot of the admin tasks, a lot of the check-ins, a lot of the how are things going can be automated, because actually there is a process, there is a set of, if this person has this result in this time frame, we should probably ask them how they're feeling, or we should ask them a set of questions that are going to help make a decision whether this is something to worry about or it's nothing at all. And so I think intuitively clinicians and anyone who's a professional knows the parts of their job that anyone can do, and they know parts of the job that probably they should be doing. Whether you're a lawyer, accountant, you are a doctor or someone else, or an engineer. And I think it's just about recognizing those areas and empowering our product design and tech team to dive into that, to leverage technology, but also recognizing that our care team knows where their speciality or where their kind of human skills are most valuable. So the short answer is maybe.
No, it's interesting that you say that the clinicians tend to have that intuition as to where things can be automated and where a person is sort of always going to be necessary. I'm interested in whether you get pushback on this idea of keeping people in the loop from other, from non-clinicians, whether that's other sort of user profiles, other buyers, or even sort of potential investors or investors that you have who might be pushing you towards a more traditional software offering. Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, we definitely have conversations with investors, with people that, that we work with, and even customers. Sometimes they say, actually, we don't actually need the care team that you have. We feel like we have enough people. We just need the technology that you guys use. We've had that conversation a couple of times. And in both of those scenarios, we have to be honest with ourselves to say, actually, to do something that's purely tech driven is a different mindset, right? It means that you have to take in consideration different things. Whereas, for example, when we were speaking to a customer that wanted to use a technology only solution, or wanted a version of that, there are things that we didn't consider, onboarding, guiding, support for that technology that we hadn't built, that would need to be built for that solution. And so I think on that side, it was recognizing that that's a different product. And when you're a startup, you have to be honest. We have to build not necessarily one thing at a time, but we have to be focused in our approach. And if we were doing both of those, we definitely wouldn't be focused. And then in the investor side, and I guess people who see potential in the business to grow, is always the question about scale. How can you grow with as minimal effort as possible? So build once and it can be used multiples and thousands of times. That kind of mindset that's notoriously been attached to SaaS products or software as a service. The thing is, I think, it's more about recognizing that actually, for the most regulated industries, and they're regulated for a reason because they're important and high risk, technology only solution can only take you so far. And I think we've seen some of this definitely in fintech, where people have taken the approach of completely trying to create these online banks that have very little to human support, but has caused, huge issues with fraud and fraud detection because you don't have people in the loop to help identify those things, and that's caused a huge amount of issue. And so I think if you look from those industries that maybe have taken technology further in a regulated space, you kind of learn those lessons. And so we just talk about Suvera's ability to scale in the context of humans being involved, but it's going to be a different type of scale, and the rate of scale is going to be different to SaaS. It will scale, but it just won't be the same as SaaS. And I think that is where we try to lean into. Also to say some of the best businesses, Amazon, Tesla, they have to leverage people to get to where they want to be. And so we can't forget that great businesses are also built on people and technology, not just technology alone.
No, it makes complete sense. And I suppose, there are big healthcare providers that have lots of people who work for them as well, right? How many people work for the NHS? It must be a lot. So they're always going to be involved to some extent. I think this point you make about sort of the challenge of having people who aren't your internal team using software you're building as well is one that we've seen sometimes historically. I think one thing we've sort of learned over the past few months is that the AI plus sort of ancestry, if you like, of what we've built can actually be really valuable though in making that transition, and particularly around some of these challenging parts of onboarding. At first, we didn't quite know who should be running that process, and then kind of realized that, well, we actually have this team of people who are, who have a lot in common with our potential users, who are experts in the software as well. We were never going to be able to hire somebody, or it was going to be very hard to find somebody who had both expertise in the law, but also in using new prototype software. But actually, we kind of created those people by having our legal team use our software as we were building it, and they've been really valuable in that onboarding process for new customers as well. Danielle, is that sort of a similar theme that you've experienced, that sort of tension between keeping the existing human in the loop process that's working well, while also that desire either mentions from customers or from investors to scale by moving to a sort of solely software solution?
Yeah, so we have, it's an interesting point. So we always said our mission is to sort of, literally free your data and free people's time and resources to focus on high value, high impact tasks. And for us, that meant taking on the burden of as much of that end-to-end process as possible, using various solutions within our platform, essentially. What we've maybe noticed more recently actually has been customers actually wanting maybe parts of that process. So for example, more tech savvy customers that have in-house developers and are trying to maybe address this sort of problem of data capture, that sort of first part of the problem with open source libraries. And we've done that ourselves. That's one of the first things we did, is obviously to go out there and see what existed. And so we know that actually a lot of those tools fall short, which is why we've built something bespoke that has a much higher performance and accuracy rate than those that are typically available out there. So we did get asked, can we expose that? We do have an API, so technically we can do that. To Ivan's point, I think it's always a balance of where do we focus resources. For us, actually having a developer-facing product is a different product, but actually is probably closer to a sort of SaaS model, in that it's quite scalable, and actually because we're not necessarily doing that human in the loop process, it is probably a bit more scalable. So that is something that we are actually starting to make available for customers where they do have the expertise on their side to be able to use those tools effectively. But yeah, I think we try to listen to our customers as much as possible, have our ear to the ground, and at the end of the day, we want to solve the problems that they have in their businesses, and everyone is slightly different. So it is that call to say, where do we split resources? But for us, actually making elements of our quite large stack available to different customers makes sense for us. So we have started to open up elements of our capabilities, actually. So we see that as actually quite an exciting thing, to be able to basically have a product for business users that want no code, very intuitive workflow tools, and also more technical teams or quant teams in financial services that want to be able to build on top of our engine. So yeah, I think we've dabbled in both, and I think we're quite excited about those two different areas, although they're quite different.
No, super interesting, And then maybe just one last question from me before we move on to any from the audience is, I suppose, thinking a bit more broadly, aside from just our own respective businesses, what's the role that you think AI plus or AI and human in the loop processes have to play in your industries more broadly, and what it means for let's call it the future of work in that sector? Ivan?
Yeah, I mean, we think a lot about the future of work in healthcare. In all honesty, if you look at it today, you'd wonder if there is a future, because everything that we do today is very similar to what we've always done. And so what we think about is the opportunity to create flexibility in the workplace for healthcare providers. We also think about, how do you allow more to be done with less? I think all of those things link very well to enabled by technology. So I think in the healthcare industry, the biggest problem is that there are more patients and to be seen and to be cared for than there are people to do it. And I think that's a problem across the entire world. There is no country where this problem is solved. And I think, we have a shortage of like 46,000 clinicians in the UK, and it's worse in other parts of the globe. And there is no, you can't train enough doctors. I've been there. It's too long to do to fix that gap with people. And so the way I see it is that human and technology will have to coexist to meet or even get close to of meeting the demand that is in the system. And I think actually the apprehension is less of technology and its value, but just more, will it create more work for people? Because notoriously technology has had a bad rep in healthcare because, you know, a lot of the systems have come in not for the purpose of the clinician, but for the system. So for like billing and for like claims and for recording what happens, but it's not about giving someone the ability to spend less time doing repetitive tasks, because it's not been designed with that in mind, unfortunately. And so there's been actually a large association between technology and burnout, just because of that work, and just the interfaces were not built for that ability to kind of do work more efficiently. And so I think the real opportunity for humans and AI in healthcare is actually building something that is usable and that actually, you know, helps reduce the burden of, you know, going back to our original reason why we pivoted. We were one of those technologies creating more work, right? And in the original zone, and we had to change the mindset. And it's very easy to do that if you don't understand that actually there are people on the other end of this and they have other problems that they need to deal with, and not just dealing with the output of your technology solution. So the short answer is, I think it will be a running theme and evolution of how we deliver healthcare, is how we allow technology to augment the people that deliver that. I don't see it happening any other way.
No, that's really interesting. So it's almost like that kind of shift of thinking from, you know, previously when people talked about technology in the healthcare system, they were thinking about a £10 billion IT overhaul for the NHS or something, which as a user of a healthcare system, you never even see that. It doesn't interact with you at all. Moving to something that's a bit more bottom up rather than top down, where you just say, let's make this thing you're trying to do a little bit easier. Doesn't need £10 billion to get started, but we can be a bit more iterative and sort of learn as we go there.
Exactly.
Yeah, super interesting. Danielle, how do you feel about that in your industry? Is it a similar kind of story?
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize for drilling in the background if you can hear that. But yeah, for us, I think, you know, there's a lot of growth in the wealth management industry, which is where we mostly operate today, and a lot of talk of democratizing that industry. You know, people want more transparency when it comes to what's in their pension pots, and also regulators as well, requiring, you know, more data disclosures. We've seen that from, you know, ESG regulation, for example. You know, more funds in the industry have to be more transparent, report more data points. And so, you know, we think along with that pressure of demanding, you know, more transparency over the investment world, there's also that expectation that you know, that the investment community that are responsible for disclosing that information, you know, do adopt technology in order to be able to do that, and to do that at scale. So, you know, I think it's also an interesting time in terms of future of work, where, you know, there's a generational change, right? So a lot of the decision makers and actually users of our technology are now millennials, if not Gen Zs. And so they came up with a very different expectation of technology and how it can help them in the consumer world. So, you know, I think it's really exciting. I think there is an opportunity for enterprise tech to more closely mimic consumer tech in terms of ease of use, in terms of flexibility, in terms of mobility. And so, you know, we very much try to adopt those principles when we think about what our product looks like, what it delivers for people, and, you know, so it can ultimately address our mission, which is to free up people's time and resources to be focusing on high value, high impact tasks, upskilling, and actually spending more time with people, really. So that's our take on it.
No, fantastic. So maybe got time for just one question at the end. So the question is whether there's sometimes a higher risk of error where in human judgment when technology is brought in as well. I imagine perhaps, thinking of people getting complacent because the technology is right most of the time, they don't really have to think about it. Is that a problem that either of you have found in your own applications, or something that you worry about at least?
I can imagine Ivan's got it's healthcare, so it's much higher risk than maybe than what we do, but it definitely is always a concern, right? You have this driver to make things easier for people, but at the same time you don't want them to become so complacent that actually your error rates potentially increase, because actually that's not working in the way that it should, or you intended. So I think we do intentionally introduce some friction into the end-to-end experience. So we do require essentially incentivize business users to have that oversight that we discussed earlier. Actually this is an anomaly, and we have various sort of detection features, for example, to keep engagement high, and we also monitor performance as well, and we have dashboards so you can always be very clear on how well things are going, and if there is error creeping in at any point in the process. So that's sort of the way that we try to address that, actually actively having some friction there to ensure that users are taking the accountability that they need to, and also monitoring the impact of that through our dashboards.
Is that something you've had to think about as well?
So in terms of managing risk,
I suppose managing managing the risk of going from a fully human process, perhaps prior to Suvera even being involved, to one in which there's technology and people take shortcuts or assume that the technology is going to get something right.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is when I spent time at Google on a DeepMind team, they had built this amazing like state-of-the-art AI, to help doctors understand images for the back of the retina that we use to diagnose. And we went then to user testing, and it was amazing what we saw, which was basically that the outcome changed as soon as you put the human involved with the technology. They thought, oh, surely like the technology tells the clinician something, they will be able to respond and make a judgment. And actually the two together had a different outcome than one by itself. Often clinicians believed more of the technology than themselves, because they said, okay, this has been trained, it has more data, maybe I've missed this situation. So they took themselves out of the diagnosis when actually they were completely correct. The algorithm had it wrong. And so I think there is an important kind of experience that needs to be tested, where you have humans and technology coexist, to understand that, so that the human understands this technology is good, but it's not good in certain scenarios. So then we had to retest the algorithm and actually say, there are certain scenarios where this algorithm isn't as great. Maybe it's like a certain type of scan, or it's a certain type of individual where actually the expertise is really important. So they started to add in confidence. So how confident was the algorithm at producing that result? And then, the clinician would like, actually, it's not that confident. What do I think in that belief? And so that was a big lesson for me, was that we're moving into a new phase where we've primarily tested a lot of these systems, against each other, AI versus human, right? But we haven't done this human AI kind of approach. And I think that should be the gold standard for how we think about technology, is how does it coexist? So at Suvera, we're very mindful of that interaction because of that experience. And so we do a lot of testing to make sure that even if we think the algorithm is amazing or it automates a lot of work, how does it operate in practice with someone using it? Do they adjust their biases accordingly? Because if we don't do that, then we put people at risk, which is, not something we want to do, because if we prescribe the wrong medication, someone could have a stroke. And so we're very aware of those things.
That's really interesting. I think for us, we, in the legal sector, there's, you call it a challenge or a sort of advantage, depending on how you think about it. But often the task we're trying to automate is a little bit subjective as well. Does this clause as it's written agree with a particular set of rules that has been prescribed by somebody? And one lawyer who's an expert might say, yes, that's fine, you don't really need to do anything about it. Another might say, well, I'd actually rather change this word or replace that word with another. And so even that kind of inter-user variation can sometimes be quite broad. And we have, some users will say, they were so amazed at how the AI picked up on this nuance, and another might say, oh, they're a bit disappointed at how it got something wrong, when it's actually the same task, the same data, the same answer being given. It just sort of depends on either some wider context or just the way that somebody happened to have been trained on something. I think another point that sort of resonates with us is something I think you mentioned, Danielle, about this sort of sense of complacency. And I remember once we've sort of had customers essentially tell us that they would rather kind of bring those friction points in because they want their juniors who are doing this quite repetitive work currently. So they almost see it as like character building to kind of go through and it's like practicing your handwriting. You need to go through these documents again and again and again and again, and only then will you have sort of learned how to do it properly. And they were sort of worried that a fully automated solution, even if it was one that we could build, would take away that training opportunity from their juniors, and that because they went through it themselves however many years ago, they want the people they're training to go through it as well. So that was something that we just hadn't really considered at all at first, that there would actually be a desire in some cases to keep a bit of that friction and that repetition, not for the point of view of the end user, but from the point of view of the person using the software to kind of get that training and get that experience. So that was just one of the things that we learned across the journey, I suppose, there. Well, I think we've come to the end of our allotted time now, so come to the end of the session. So thanks very much for everyone for attending, and a big thank you for our guest speakers, Ivan and Danielle, for joining us today, for sharing your insights on this space. So we've got a recording of the session which will be shared I think on our website this week, and there's some more webinars happening later on in the week as well, so do sign up for those. Tomorrow at the same time, I think at 11, we're going to be presenting a sort of product demo, so talking through some of the software that we've been developing at Robin for our team internally and also for external users now as well. So we're sort of showing that AI plus solution, I suppose, that we've been talking about today. And then on Thursday, we're going to be talking about a bit more detail on machine learning, the sort of fundamentals there, machine learning and AI, and explaining how the AI that we've built sort of goes and reads the contracts, sort of analyzes that data that's so important for us in the legal tech space as well. So if you're interested in attending either of those, then please visit our website, robinai.co.uk, and register there. But otherwise, yeah, thanks again for everybody for attending. Thanks, Ivan and Danielle, and have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, James. Been a pleasure.
Okay. Cheers.
Bye-bye.